Hello, and welcome to another episode of Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. I'm your host, Amanda, and my amazing co host is.
Hello, I'm Megan.
Hey. So, we are your messy, imperfect homeschool mom friends. So many homeschool influencers out there present this like squeaky, clean, everything's perfect image. And while we all logically know that it's not true, we also know that seeing that kind of stuff really can do a number on your subconscious. So it leaves many of us feeling just less than, and we don't need more of that. So here we give you the whole scoop, the good, the bad, and sometimes, yes, it even gets ugly.
Sometimes, right?
Yeah.
That is true. For example, today I am playing my typical game, which I do quite often, of am I getting sick? Is it stress? Or do I have a brain tumor? And I'm not joking about cancer. That's a legitimate concern that pops into my head all the time. I am the wife of a cancer survivor. I've lived that path and it sucks. But so I'm not making a joke. That's completely where I'm at. And I know I'm not the only one who goes there. I have a tightness in my jaw. It's probably a brain tumor. I'm not alone. I know it. So beyond my raging anxiety, another thing that sets us apart here at Homeschool Moms Unfiltered is our secular and progressive ideology. We loudly and proudly affirm that Black Lives Matter, love is love, no human is illegal on stolen land, and forced birth isn't what we call freedom. And yes, we do our absolute best to acknowledge our privilege whenever it is showing.
Yeah, we try. We're not perfect. We're not going to pretend to be perfect, but we do try. So, if all of that sounds like a breath of fresh air to you in a homeschooling world where statements like, I need science curriculum that aligns with Jesus and flat earth are way too common, stay tuned. We have a whole community of like minded homeschool peeps who can't wait to welcome you. Truly, it's a huge community. So this week, we are following Meagan down a recent interest-based rabbit hole that spawned from our episode about deschooling. We did a whole regular episode about deschooling a few weeks ago. Today, we're going to be talking about monochronic and polychronic societies and how our ingrained cultural tendencies affect our outlook on education and the future for our kids. Now, I'm going to be honest here. I have shared in many previous episodes that I am disabled, and I have been in the midst of a pretty intense chronic illness flare for a couple of weeks now. And with that comes some pretty intense brain fog, but also this weird inability to have great conversations that do not convert to memories. So I came for today's episode with ADHD hack notes. But that's not what we're doing, and it's all good, right? We'll all learn something new today.
Oh my gosh, I get it, right? We're all hanging on by the skin of our teeth, and yeah, I'm good with either, so I'm happy to explore. And we will do ADHD hacks, so your notes are not in vain.
Oh, good. I'm
We
like, at
will
least
get there.
yeah, I saved them in Google Docs. It'll be fine. I'll get back to you. Like, it's all good.
That's so good, right? Yep. All right. But before we dive into our topic for the week, we do like to keep it real around here. And one of the ways that we do that is just kind of providing a glimpse into our lives and the week that we've had leading up to our recording day. So you shared a little bit, Amanda, but what else is going on in your world?
I, you know, we're hanging in there. When I have these flares, right? There's a real loosening of standards and expectations. Kind of ironically, I was complaining to you, Megan, over the weekend, like, oh, we haven't done anything this past week. Like, we got home from our travel and I've been feeling terrible. And we literally haven't done anything. The only thing we've done is math, history, and science every day. And it was kind of like, you realize that that's not nothing by like everyone's standards, right? And
Good.
yeah, there's a lot of truth to that. This week, we have gotten back into the groove of things. We're hitting things pretty well. It was that thing like the first day of like, okay, we're really going to try to get everything done, kind of stretched to 3, 4 in the afternoon, which I really dislike. Right. And so that process for us of getting back into the rhythm that works well for us, where we knock things out and then we have the afternoons free and we have time to do play dates and things like that. It's important in our home. It takes a little bit of work to get back to that rhythm after we've been really thrown off. And so that's what we've been working on this week. I inadvertently have the memory of a goldfish. I'm not trying to have it, but that's definitely what's happening. And I think in a lot of ways, that probably helps a lot of things. Also makes struggles because I pick up random notes. I know, right? This is not a new problem for me. I've had this for many, many years. It's just a little bit worse and seems to go on a little bit longer now that I have long COVID as well. But one of the things that I know I have to do is write notes, like write down everything so that I don't forget it. And so I have notepads and sticky notepads and post-its and things like things all over so I can always write stuff down. The problem is I write it down and then I don't remember where I put it, or I set it down with the intention of putting it in my calendar or something like that. And it's just gone, right? Like poof. And then I randomly, like days later, or sometimes even just hours later, come across this note that I wrote. And I'm like, I wonder if that was important. So yeah, but it's all right. We've got a lot of rain. It's been raining here. And so that, of course, means it's going to flood because SoCal doesn't do well with rain. We need it. But so, yeah, we're just hanging on. We'll float on by. It is what it is.
Potentially literally float on by, right? Exactly. If your condo isn't on the ground floor.
Oh, I am thankful for that so often. So often. We're high enough, even if we get a tsunami, we'll be okay. It would have to be a shockingly large tsunami to not be okay. So,
Well, that's good news.
yeah, there you go. We have the opposite problem, right? Like you were saying, with your anxiety, you immediately go to cancer. And we've talked about this before, how different our personalities are when it comes to these things. And for me, I'm always like, oh, well, I had this crazy kind of cancer that was like, oh, only 2%, like only 5% of people get these types of tumors. And of those 5%, only 2% of that 5% are this specific type. And of that type, only 2 to 3% convert to cancer. So it won't be cancer. And then, of course, it was cancer. So I'm always like, I already had the crazy rare cancer. It won't be cancer again. I'm like, I'm sure my doctor does not appreciate that. Like, I'm always like, I don't think we need to run that test on cancer again. Like, I know it doesn't work that way. Logically, I know that, like, it's not like a one and done, like, oh, I did my turn. But yeah, different ways of approaching things. All right. So how about you? You said that crazy, I'm not feeling great. What's going on? And then I know there's some other stressful things happening. How's it going?
Yeah, it just is like I have arrived to recording today kind of palpitating, which is fun. So, but I'm here and it's all good. So yeah, we had to book an appointment with regard to our move to Portugal, and the whole system is super dysfunctional and the website sucks and there's no customer service. And, I mean, it's the bureaucracy that you kind of expect when you're like, I'm going to go live in Portugal, but to actually go through it is really, really fun. And, you have other things in your life that are balancing on like when we get this document or this piece of paper, or when we have this appointment or something. And so other things are in limbo while that's happening. And, it's just, we've been in limbo for many months because of this move. And so it would just be nice to not for a while. So I have kind of like a tightening in my jaw down here on the right. And this happened in December, and I was convinced it was a brain tumor then. It was at that time, it was either a brain tumor or that my root canal had failed because I have a toothbrush here that had a root canal like a year ago. And neither one was good because I'm petrified of the dentist on a level of like pills and vomiting, and like it's a whole situation. It's more than the average, like no one likes the dentist's levels of anxiety. And so yeah, it started. So I'm like, at least it just happened in December. So I'm like, the last time it was stress, it's probably just stress, right? And trying to kind of breathe and relax and all that kind of stuff. But it'll pass. As long as it's not a brain tumor, it'll pass. And so, that's just kind of been the thing. My kids are all kind of doing a whole bunch of stuff. One of my kids leaves for Greece and Turkey in 5 days for 6 weeks. And then, so that's on, hold on, I got to look at a calendar. That's on Tuesday. He flies to Greece. And then one of my other kids is leaving on Sunday to go to the other side of England for a weaving workshop. She'll be there for 5 days. The boys are going to Manchester this weekend for a day to play Yu-Gi-Oh! So like everybody, they're like pinballs, right? They're all over the place in this land of independent teenagerhood. So it's just kind of like keeping all those pinballs in motion where they're supposed to be. But yeah, other than that, it's all good. And, I'm going to try to get to bed early tonight. I'm watching a show or a movie on Netflix called She Said. It said Leaving Soon on Netflix, and the title got my attention. And it's about the person who investigated Harvey Weinstein and kind of blew up the whole thing and started the Me Too movement, like the reporter that did that. But it's a movie. And so I'm only like a quarter of the way into it. So I'm like, you know what? When we're done tonight, there's one milk bar left in the kitchen. I'm totally going to get myself a milk bar and go curl up in bed with the dogs and the kiddos and watch a movie, and everybody can snuggle up and do their thing. So after we record, I'm just going to breathe and relax. And you know what? Anytime I come to recording and I'm like super stressed, by the time we're done, like I enjoy this. You know what I mean? So by the time we're done, I feel better. I had the same thing yesterday when I got to my book club that I lead, and I got there and I was just stressed about the news. The world is on fire and everything is bad. And it's like, holy shit, right? And I got there, and one of my students, I've shared before, I've been leading this book club for 5 years. So I've had some of these kids. She's 16 now, but she was like 11, 12 when she started with me. And she's dual enrolled in college, and she did a paper for something. And there's 3 manners of assessment in her class for papers. And this one was conference style, where you have to argue your paper basically and defend, kind of like thesis defense, I would guess, like based upon the way she described it. And the professor asked her if he could use her paper as an example for the class. And she started class that way. And it just like turned everything. Like, I felt so much better after that. I was so, I mean, she was so cute. She was so proud of herself, as well she should have been. And I was just so happy for her. So same thing. When we do this, I'll feel better because, smooth everything over. So anyway, topic for the week. Okay. Yes. Total rabbit hole for me, right? We're exploring monochronic and polychronic ideology cultures. And I've dragged Amanda along for this ride. We're going to look at cultures, rhythms, whatever you want to say about how these styles affect our lives. Here we go.
Yeah. And, it's interesting timing because I did just come back from being in Italy for a few months. And I have lived overseas in different places with different styles and cultures. And so I think, I think there's a lot of pros and cons. I think it'll be a good discussion once we lay the groundwork. So, what exactly are monochronic and polychronic cultures? Monochronic has a few kind of specific things that help identify it, right? So you've got highly structured, time oriented, and organized. People in these societies value punctuality, schedules, and efficiency. Tasks are completed one at a time in a linear fashion. And some examples include the United States, Germany, and Japan. We joke all the time. If you're going to take a train somewhere, you probably want to do it in Germany or Japan. Those are great trains to be on. And if you're Meagan in the UK trying to get to IKEA, like it's probably not going to go as smoothly.
Yeah, and it's so funny because my daughter and I were having this conversation the other day about how England is kind of this interesting mix of that European polychronic and the American monochronic. Like
Yeah.
it's got kind of both traits in there.
It is. It's for sure somewhere in the middle.
And we'll talk about how the US ended up polychronic or monochronic, sorry, which is an interesting deeper level of the rabbit hole. But first, polychronic. So polychronic cultures are more flexible and they're more relationship oriented. They tend to be more fluid with time. So if something starts at 10, it's 10-ish, right? And I am married to a South American and I understand this concept, 10-ish. People tend to multitask. So you might be chopping vegetables while your kids are on the floor playing at your feet and you have friends over who are just sipping coffee at your breakfast bar. There's kind of a lot more fluidity to life. They adjust schedules as needed. Things that come to mind are like nap schedules and things like that. They prioritize social interactions over strict time management. And examples of those countries might be Latin America, African cultures, and Middle Eastern cultures. So, how did the United States become a monochronic culture? The first thing is the Protestant work ethic. And yes, we are a secular podcast. We are not about to preach Protestant values to you. We're just giving you an idea of where it came from.
Understanding.
Exactly, right? The Protestant work ethic, historically speaking, values hard work, discipline, and productivity as moral virtues. So early Puritan settlers were influenced by Calvinist ideals and believed that time should not be wasted and that diligence and efficiency were signs of righteousness.
Oh yeah, their whole need for righteousness and piety was a whole thing, and it was a big whole thing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So that mindset really laid the foundation for a culture that equates time management with success and morality. So It's interesting because I doubt too many people have ever thought about time management and morality being super closely linked, but that's historically speaking where these origins came from.
I'm going to say, I think more people than you realize have thought about it. I definitely thought about that connection in US culture, especially. I feel like that's one of those things, maybe even before the pandemic, fewer people didn't think about it, but it kind of came up, and social media has a lot more people realizing some of these things and trying to, that kind of like part of the work of decolonization is letting go of some of those connections. And so the more people who are understanding what that means and what that looks like, and trying to do that in their own home and life.
Hmm. There were some really great shifts that came out of the pandemic. Obviously, the pandemic itself is horrible, but those kind of like work-life balance shifts and things like that
Mm,
that started to be born from the whole circumstance are silver lining to a really crappy situation.
yeah, for sure.
The other thing is the rise of capitalism and our time is money mentality in the United States. So, factory work is kind of the foundation of our capitalist system in the United States. I think most homeschoolers are familiar with the influence of industrial revolution on our education system, but we're going to talk about it just a smidge in case you're not. So, factory work requires strict schedules, time clocks, punching in and out, shift work, maximum efficiency, reinforcing the idea that time can be measured and controlled and monetized. And that original time is money quote supposedly was attributed to Ben Franklin. So, it goes back pretty far. So, this mentality led to workplace norms emphasizing punctuality, tight schedules, and efficiency driven decision making. And I just find the timing of this super duper interesting because we're having this whole big discussion right now about, should the United States be run like a corporation? There's plenty of big CEOs and really successful people who are saying, running the US like a corporation does not make sense. It's a company. It's meant to serve the people, not serve shareholders or produce a bottom line. And of course, that's the cause of much of our chaos that's been going on for the last 2 months now.
Yeah. Well, and I think another thing that's interesting to think about, that's one of those kind of disconnects that you see, especially in the United States. I won't speak to other countries that have this culture, but the time is money culture and mentality somehow mostly applies only to your time at work.
Mm,
Once you get home, now your time isn't very valuable and you're expected to use it on this and that and, and all of these other things, instead of being like, well, your time is valuable and you should maximize it in the way that works for you in your personal life. Like, no, no, no. Like at that point, there's not the value there, So it's an interesting, yeah, disconnect in my opinion.
well, on that thought also of like, do you ever see those things where they equate what a stay-at-home parent's value
Yeah.
is?
Mhm.
Right. And so it's like, yeah, there's a tremendous amount of value assigned to that, but it's not
Yeah, because it's
really
yes,
that
that's it.
amount,
It's
right?
it's not, yeah, you're not monetizing it in the capitalist society and in that whole system. There's a lot that could be said about that, right? Like, yeah, I won't go down that rabbit hole. We'll stick with this because this could be a very long podcast if I don't stay a little bit more focused. All right, so how does this play out in everyday life? Well, we were just talking about that. You've got your work and business kind of situation where you have your strict schedules, you've got your structured meetings. Anyone who's ever worked in any sort of an office environment knows what the meetings are like and how important they are, and the fact that oftentimes you have way more meetings than you have anything else. The metric driven decision making and the work performance reviews with these whole charts and, all of this. And it's all right. It's so formal, it's so organized. And then on the other side of it, you've got education. So before you get into work and business, you learn, whether you're learning as homeschooling or you're learning in the public school system. And education, especially in the public school system, you have the bells in school that keep everything on a really strict schedule. You have standardized tests that keep everything very organized and strict. And hopefully, this, you're working towards this and everyone has the same goals. It's this kind of like group work, group think thing. You've got time blocked learning periods. You've got specific times that you can take a break to use the restroom. You can take a break to have your lunch. And and they're very limited. There's either time to socialize or there's time to eat, but there's probably not time to do both at lunch because you get a short window for lunch. So these are all kinds of ways that we really see it play out in the United States.
Well, we see a bridge, I think, too, between the school structure that you're talking about and the work structure that you're talking about. Because to me, the perfect attendance award is one of my biggest pet peeves in the public school system. Right? It's that training for corporate America. Like, it doesn't matter that your grandmother just died. You can't call out. You're going to lose this award you're going to be called up on stage at the end of the year to give this to you. And it's like all these times when maybe you're not feeling your best physically. Maybe you have a bug, but you push through because you're going to get this award. And those are the people that push through in corporate America. They're the ones who often end up getting rewarded and things like that. The ones who have that work-life balance are seen maybe not as contributing as much or slacking or something, right? So we've even got that bridge connection that's there that's really training people from such an early age that these are the expectations of your hard work.
Yeah, absolutely. And it applies with sick things too, with being sick. The average American company, if they give sick leave, they give something like 3 days a year. Because have you ever had any illness that only knocked you on your butt for 3 days? When we were in Italy, the friends that we were staying with, her partner, he was not well. And it wasn't like a big virus with throwing up and all those awful things. Like it seems like he was just kind of down with a cold or something. And they were testing for COVID and making sure it wasn't that and that kind of stuff. And so I was like, okay, that's cool. And he ended up being out for like 5 work days spanning a weekend. And I really had to check myself because I was just like, what in the world? Like that is like, it's a freaking cold. Like, how can you take 5 days? Like, go get yourself some good cold medicine and get back to it. Right. But like, that is not how most cultures work. And it's that thing like, you're sick, please don't come in and give it to everyone else. And I'm a huge believer in that, right? Like I'm immunocompromised. I have all these things going on. Like, I don't want you bringing your germs to me. And in most of the things that I do in my life, like the people I work with know that if they're not 100%, even though I'm going to wear a mask when I go meet up with anyone, because you just don't know if they're not 100%, they send me a message and say like, hey, I'm pretty sure I'm sick. I'm not feeling great, but I'm still at work because of XYZ. Do you want to postpone the meeting? And I was like, yes. Thank you very much. Yes. But we teach kids to go to school sick. We teach them to take the medicine to make sure that they're still there. We penalize them if they miss it with extra work. And if you miss too many days, then you have to take this extra test at the end of the semester. Like we do all of these things to make sure that they don't take more than their 3 days of sick leave once they get into the workforce. So it's totally true.
I mean, he took more time off than some women get after having babies. I'm laughing, which is so not funny, but
yeah,
that's how ridiculous the comparison is society wise. It's just absurd, right?
Yeah, that's it. I mean, no matter how bad a man cold is, it was probably not as bad as labor. Like there's probably a little bit more that has to happen there to move past that. All right. So we have plenty of other things to discuss with regards to culture, scheduling, and all of that jazz. But first, we want to remind everyone who is new to the podcast that we offer homeschool coaching. So we'll drop a link in our show notes. And if you're catching this clip, I don't know, on social media or YouTube or wherever, you'll be able to go in and see there where it is, or you can always send us a DM, right? We're happy to help get you to whatever link you need. But we offer personalized coaching sessions on literally everything, right? From navigating the California homeschool charter system to choosing the right homeschool curriculum for your learners' individual needs, to building a high school transcript and cutting the cord to traditional education and taking the leap into homeschooling, right? A lot of times parents are like, we want to do this. I know it's the right thing. And I'm almost ready to do it, but I'm feeling like a little, like I've listened to all the podcasts, I've joined your group, I've read all the posts, and I just need you to talk to me and tell me exactly what it should look like in my home. And just that little bit of like encouragement and hand holding to like kind of get going. So you name it, between the two of us, we can absolutely help. You can book one-on-one with each of us, or you can book us together. A lot of times, if you're not entirely sure what you're doing, together is the best bet because we come from such different ends of the spectrum. We usually have really unique ideas on for brainstorming and troubleshooting and problem solving things.
I was laughing when you said, like, if you just need somebody to take you that last step, because yesterday I texted my mom in the morning and I was like, let me know when you're awake, please. And I called her and I was like, I'm ordering a sofa and I need help. Oh, do I know? I was like 99.999% sold on the color that I wanted. And I just needed my mom. I'm going to be 44 in like 2 weeks. And I needed my mom to be like, that's a great color. You should buy that sofa. Or sometimes you just need that. And you mentioned it, right? I think we both agree that that's one of the strengths of our partnership. With you being so far to one end, aggressive academic homeschooling, and me being at the other end with loosey-goosey unschooling, we have just about everybody's bases covered. So schedule a session anytime you need. Come, we'll help you make decisions. If you're doubting yourself, if you're just getting started and you need help taking those first few steps, we're here. We can't wait to meet with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are extra fun. Like you were saying, like I also enjoy recording the podcast. Like we do this because we want to help people, and we hope that by putting stuff out there, someone is listening and like, oh, that's really helpful. But the one-on-one conversations where like people leave feeling really like, okay, yeah, I'm feeling a lot better about this. Like that's great, and we've got our little list of links and specific things we're going to send to you after we get off of the call. Like they just feel great. Okay, so let's get back to your rabbit hole. We did do an episode on deschooling a few weeks ago. And oftentimes some of the biggest pushback to deschooling is that we need structure. And you and I don't 100% agree on the need for structure and how we put that in our own homes. So here's the, $10 million questions. Is the need to cling to structure something that we also need to deschool? You can tell just by the way that question is written, that was written by Meagan. The need to cling to structure. Well, I didn't necessarily want structure or the amount of structure that we have in our homeschool, but it became pretty clear very early on that we needed a lot more structure because my kiddo needed it. What does that mean? I do agree that it's like second nature to just think you need this level of structure, that you need these color-coded charts and that you need the clock on the wall that's color-coded for the kids to look and be able to know that like this is this time and this is that time. And, there's all kinds of crazy things out there. And I don't think that we need that, but I think that we don't necessarily need to look down on structure either. But how do you make sure you're using structure in the way that you need if you haven't actually taken that step back and been like, okay, I really need to think about this level of structure and why do I feel like I need this level of structure? Do I need this level? What are the motivations behind it? Versus like, okay, well, I don't need this kind of thing for X, Y, and Z, but in my personal life or in my own home, this works because of A, C, and G.
Yeah. And I'm not particularly anti-structure. We kind of have, I always say we have a rhythm. We don't have a structure. We have a rhythm and it works. So it's not mass chaos over here 24/7. We do have kind of a set rhythm and a set process. But when I was really thinking about it, I mean, how many questions did we get about structure and deschooling? How do I put structure into deschooling? Or we deschooled, but with structure because we couldn't not have math class. And I was like, well, that's not deschooling then, right? Like that's not how that works.
I definitely, you can say you took some time to rethink it or reevaluate, but you didn't actually deschool. Like to deschool, you have to step away from that and take it all apart and decide how you're going to put it back together. And you might put it back together very similarly, but you have to take it all apart and decide how you're going to put it back together. You don't get to be like, well, we kept it. We just took a couple pieces out, but we completely rebuilt it, even though we didn't actually take it apart. Like, well, but you didn't. You didn't. And that's okay if that's what you're going to do. But like, please don't come and tell us that that's how you deschool, because it's not.
It's not deschooling, right? Exactly. Yeah. And so I think that's the biggest thing for me with this is those questions about deschooling and structure is like, okay, people are saying, okay, I'm committing to deschooling. I'm committing to setting aside academics, but I still need the structure. And I'm like, but hang on a second, because the structure is also part of the school system. So, and that need for structure, because that's how that day is that's how that day is, I was going to say structured. That was a poor use of, it's like when you define a word using the word. The school day is built around these time blocks and every moment is accounted for and efficiency and all of that, leading to the workforce that does the exact same thing. And I mean, if you're not familiar, I think most people are because it's made the rounds, but I think it's important to realize our school system was developed by industrialists, right? Our school system was developed by Carnegie, by Rockefeller. They put in millions of dollars to start what becomes the Board of Education. And so if we're going to deschool and set aside formal lessons on math and writing and all that kind of stuff, because we want to detoxify ourselves of the school mentality, that structure is as much a part of the school mentality as anything. And so to your point, you might put it all back in. I mean, unless you're going to completely radically unschool, you're going to put back in some math, some writing, some stuff like that. So it makes sense that you would put some structure back in too. But I think to your point, until you've stripped it all away and really looked at why are we clinging to the structure? Why do we think we need the structure? That's how we were raised. That's how our kids were raised. That's how our parents were raised. So it's been ingrained in us, and students are thriving in these polychronic cultures without that level of structure. So let's unpack that a little bit before we just set up our homeschool and rethink the way we teach math and we teach writing, but keep that structured mindset the exact same way that it is.
Yeah.
It's worth some deconstructing.
Yeah. And I do agree with that. Though to play the devil's advocate, I will say that there are plenty of people who would point to some very monochromic cultures where the students are thriving in specific ways that matter to them. They might not be thriving quite as much with mental health, which is a whole other issue, right? Like I'm not saying that that's right, but I don't want to call specifically, but I'm sure most people who are listening can think of some cultures where like a true academic thriving and really moving through that and that kind of focus is really strong. And there's a significantly smaller focus on this idea of understanding your feelings and including SEL stuff and mental health and those kinds of things. And I don't necessarily think that we're here to say like, well, your entire culture is wrong. So there are ways, depending on where you're at and where you want to be, then maybe it's working. But if you have the flexibility to homeschool and you have the flexibility to stop and take the time to think about these things and really figure out if this is where you want to be long term, like, please take that time.
Yeah, you might add it all back in, but
Yeah.
and that's cool. But at least it's there with a purpose. And it's there because it's been really well thought through and it's a very intentional choice as opposed to the default that's just kind of ingrained in us from society. So I thought it might be kind of fun for us to hypothesize what a day of homeschooling might look like in a more polychronic approach. And we probably have more of this in our lives, but I wouldn't necessarily say also that we're polychronic just as a result. I mean, again, this is a new rabbit hole for me, so I'm still unpacking a bunch of stuff myself, right? But, right, so we talked about some of the characteristics. Time is people or relationship centered and not clock centered. So I'm thinking about examples where we've heard people say, like, my kids are in the other room playing and they're creating these amazing imaginative games and they're all getting along really, really well. But I'm stressing out because we were supposed to start school 45 minutes ago, right? And so that is like the opposite of the polychronic mentality. Okay, they can play then, right? And in that polychronic mentality, let them play because that's the important thing. We'll get to the other thing later. It's all fluid. It's okay. That's kind of that polychronic mentality, the way I see it as it pertains to homeschool. What do you think?
I mean, maybe. I guess I think that even in a polychronic mentality, you might have specific, for whatever reason, reasons that you have to move on or get something started at a certain time. But I think that it might be in some cases that like that bigger picture thing of like, they were really enjoying this thing and we need to move on to something else right now for whatever reason. But I'm going to go ahead and change what I had planned to do later in the week to make sure that we can bring this in and we'll just, shift things around and make things work so that we don't just completely forget about their interests or what they had going on, but we, incorporate that in a way. I just don't have the bandwidth to incorporate that right now, right? Like I got stuff up, like whatever it is, like, or maybe you're one of those parents that's like, I wish I was that flexible. I'm not that flexible. So today we're going to do what I had planned and then I can recalibrate and bring that in a way. Like I think even in the most chronic societies, you have type A people who are main planners and we'll like so I think it can be both of those.
Hmm. Well, yeah, because in our monochronic society, we have people that just march to their own beat and just kind of do their thing, and there's free flowing as it comes. So they're
Yeah.
just not as widely as accepted. They're seen as flaky, or they're seen as oftentimes they're seen as unreliable or whatever. And in a polychronic, you might have it the opposite, where they have some sort of even some conscious biases against people who lean in the other direction if it's not the cultural majority.
Yeah.
Could be.
Yeah. And to that regard, like, or to that thought, I think that's one of those things that's important to remember, right? Like, just because it works for you or because you think in an ideal world it should work this way, it doesn't mean that everyone works that way. And as long as you don't have these wildly polychronic kids who are incredibly flexible and freewheeling, and you're like, I'm a type A planner and you will type A your ass down. As long as you're not actually really stifling them and hurting them in that process, I think we need to be careful about that judgment, right? Like in our monochronic society, we're not like, hey, we should make sure we really judge those people that march to a different beat. And so, I think we just need to make sure that we're remembering, right? Like different things work for different people. And as long as it's not actively hurting your children, like do do what works, Again,
Yeah.
think about it, deconstruct it, make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. And there's probably going to be some compromise there, especially if you're the one that's the outlier or the
Mhm.
marching to the beat of your own drum. Good. That's all right. I personally think life is more exciting with compromise.
Mhm. Yeah. I don't think we squarely fit into one category because we are some pretty go with the flow people, but we are never late for a doctor's appointment or something like that. And that is one of the characteristics of this society is that, right, is that rudeness that comes with being late. And so I think it's possible that a lot of people are kind of fluid between things depending on the circumstance or the application, who they're with, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I mean, like routines, that's a great one, right? So, this idea of like routines being adaptable and, being flexible with nap times or, you know, I am sure everyone listening to that podcast knows that parent or that caregiver who was like, no, we have to be home at this time so that they're in their crib with the lights off for their nap at this time. And then the others who are like, yeah, they'll fall asleep in the stroller or in the baby Bjorn or the whatever you were using at the time, right? I just super dated myself there. But, those differences in meal times, you see this a lot as well. Bedtimes, if you're if you're not in the United States, you have probably seen bedtime shift a lot. And I actually had a conversation with my friend who works at a Steiner slash Waldorf school in Italy about this specifically because there was something said and she was inviting us to dinner and the dinners were always at like 9 p.m., which is quite late for us to eat, even in like normal circumstances. People think I don't usually wait until 9 p.m. to have dinner. And it was initially very challenging with my kiddo because he wasn't staying up that late. By the time we were done at the end of our stay there in Italy, he was going to bed at midnight or 1 a.m. So a 9 p.m. dinner was not that big of a deal, but in the beginning. And so I had just kind of casually like broach this topic of like, oh, that, like, is that a normal thing? Because in the US, well, I mean, there's this stereotype that a lot of families have dinner at 5. Like, we've never been a sit down and eat at 5 kind of family. I'm not sure. I think that's really hard for a lot of families, right? Because most people aren't even home by then. Um, but that like more like a 6 or a 7 p.m. dinner time, not so late. And she was like, that's so early. Why would you do that? And I was like, well, it's so that kids can get to sleep early enough because they have to be up a lot of times by 7 in the morning and they need quite a lot of sleep when they're little, like the number of hours. Most people do not realize the number of hours. My kiddo's 11 still needs 10 to 11 hours of sleep every night if you're going to have a pleasant kid to interact with the next day.
I need that many hours of sleep to be pleasant too, basically.
In fairness, I'm much happier when I've had that much time in bed as well. And she just kind of looked at me and she was like, well, I mean, our kids have to be up by 7, sometimes even earlier, depending on where their parents are taking them or what's going on. But they still eat dinner at 9. And I was just like, I find that so interesting because not that long ago, social media was full of all of these charts about how many hours kids need for proper brain development and physical health for their bodies to be able to rebuild and take care of muscle and just all of these kinds of things. And she's not a parent. So I wasn't going to grill her about, well, didn't your doctor say that your kiddo needed, like she works in the school. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting. I wonder if this idea of how many hours of sleep a night that kids need is like less of a concern or issue in these more polychronic societies? Or is there going to be a shift that's coming there because of these kind of advances in science and the things that we know around some of those things? And what does that look like?
Mhm. Can I blow your mind really quick?
Sure.
All my kids were sleep trained on hardcore sleep schedules.
And I didn't. I refused to sleep train.
From the day they came home from the hospital. Like literally,
Wow.
and I have one insomniac, but that has nothing to do with anything. That's a neurodivergence issue. But I have 2 hardcore sleepers. So somebody that I worked with recommended this book that was called like Healthy Sleep, Happy Baby or something like that. And I read it and it was like, this is what you must do. And I was like, oh, okay. And so I did it. And they were in bed. I mean, it was daylight when they were going to bed all the time. And 2 naps a day, very set schedule. Nothing was, and I had the privilege of doing that too because I was working full time, but we had a nanny. So her life just revolved around nap schedules and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, here I am, the Lucy Goosey hippie over here who like hardcore sleep trained her kids. And I don't know that I'd do it any different, to be honest with you. Like it worked. It worked really well when they were younger so who knows? I don't know. But yeah, I mean, it's totally common when you're at a park in Europe to see parents in the summertime when the sun's out super late. Parents are sitting on a park bench chatting with friends, having a glass of wine or something. Kids are playing it's late at night. It's like, okay, I mean, it's just very, very different.
Yeah, no, and I mean, to your point, my kiddo was born in Belgium and spent his first several months in Belgium. So what we did with him in those early days was fairly different because the expectation and the culture around a lot of things. And I'm sure in the very beginning, I tried to implement some of these things. I mean, it's very prevalent in American culture. And I was definitely on American websites reading the advice with fellow American moms, even though I was living in Belgium. But man, I don't know, probably by a month in, I was like, I'm not sure why we're fighting so hard to get this kid to go to bed before midnight. He clearly prefers to go to bed at midnight. So I guess we'll just let him go to bed at midnight. And he liked to go to bed. We lived on a pedestrian street with cobblestones. It was just closed down to cars. And so we would be out there like literally in the middle of the night with him in the stroller, pushing the stroller back and forth on the cobblestones to get him to fall asleep. And that was just what we did. That was our version of sleep training, cobblestone training. And the worst part is we moved back to the United States and there was no rough cobblestone place anywhere. And then we were really like, we had some rough months when we moved back to the US because our tried and true, this is what puts him to sleep. We no longer had access to it. We're all over town looking for cobblestones or maybe sort of like rough brick. It's really hard to find.
Wasn't happening, right? I don't think that's just the thing in Europe. Kids are so much more integrated into daily life. You see kids at restaurants all the
Else.
time and they're eating adult foods. It's not like there's a I mean, there are sometimes kids menus, but it's less common. It's just
Yeah, it's
kids
super
are
uncommon.
just,
Yeah.
yeah, kids are just part of the world and very, very different from the way that they're kind of separated in at least American society. I can't speak for other monochronic cultures, but very different. And I think in homeschooling, we have a bit more of that typically too. The longer you've been homeschooling, the more your family functions as a unit because you're together all
Mhm.
along. So
Yeah.
I think homeschoolers do tend to lean into that a bit too.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I would agree with that. That idea of kids just being a part of the family unit for going out to restaurants, especially as babies. When you start as babies, and so they, for the most part, have a pretty good idea and understanding of how to behave in restaurants. All right. So we're talking schedules, and we totally acknowledge it's not the same for everyone. What about what once you add in neurodiversity? Do neurodiverse people need these strict routines to function? What do you think, Megan? I know I think again, I think that this is one of those things where you might find that your kiddo or you as a neurodiverse adult do significantly better with a certain type of structure, set rigid routines. There's a comfort in that, or there can be a real comfort in that. But again, once you start saying like, well, you have this, so you have to this, you feel like, come on, that's not how it works. It's never how it works.
I think the interesting thing is I'm in a lot of autism and homeschooling groups because I have two autistic kiddos. And it's so interesting, I think, when people are talking about pulling their kids from public school and they're planning to homeschool and they're trying to get their ducks in a row, which is awesome. And they're like, but they need structure because they thrive on structure. And I'm like, you actually don't get much more structured than the public school system. And if your kiddo was thriving, you wouldn't be pulling them out of school. So it is time to kind of like unpack that a little bit. I think like anything else, there's a spectrum of people. Not all autistic individuals are the same. Not all ADHD individuals are the same. But it's become kind of this cultural thing, like autism equals rigid, autism
Mm.
equals scheduled. And there are probably people who thrive brilliantly under our super rigid scheduled structure or lifestyle. And then, like anything else, there's people who don't, who are also autistic because not all autistic individuals are the same. But I think it's become one of those things. It's kind of like there's these hallmarks of autism that have spread. It's tippy-toe walking, doesn't look people in the eyes, likes to line things up. There's kind of these stereotypical things, and they might be indicators of autism, and they might the hell not be. I mean, there's so many autistic individuals in this world, and they are not all the same. And so that need for scheduling, I think, is kind of that same thing. I have, like I said, two kiddos who are autistic. Our house runs on rhythm. There's kind of a flow to it that's organic and feels natural, but is a little bit predictable. And then there's plenty of room for variance. And it works. It's not
Mhm.
causing them undue stress or whatever. But that doesn't mean it's going to work for all autistic individuals. It works for my two kids.
Yeah.
Right. So
And I
I
do
think it's like
think,
anything else. Unpack it. Right.
yeah,
Figure it out.
that's it. Unpack it. And also, I think that a lot of times routines, and maybe not rigid routines, but routines with very clear structure can work really well for younger kiddos as they are really learning those executive skill functions and you're working on giving them independence. If you really want your kiddo to be able to get themselves dressed in the morning to go to a specific play date or something like that, I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing to have some very specific routines of like, if we're going to leave the house and you're going to dress yourself, it looks like this. Take your clothes off, put on clean underwear, a pair of pants and a shirt. Like, we're not going in just pants. We're not going in just a shirt. You have to have pants and a shirt. These are things that realistically, with a 3, 4, 5, 6, depending on your kiddo, 7, 8 year old, there are societal norms that need to be met and things that you care about. I don't necessarily think it's bad to have those pretty structured routines, but I also think that realistically, as you're building those executive function skills, you're going to be able to back off of a lot of those. as your kiddo gets older and they get better at a lot of these kinds of things. It doesn't mean that you have to then also structure everything.
Yeah, that's it. Right. I think that's the whole thing. Unpack it and see where structure suits you, where it makes sense, and then really question the parts where you're like, am I just doing this because this is the way it's always been done kind of thing?
Yeah.
Some of those things when I started my own household. My first kid was born in January 2008, which, if you're living in the US, was economic meltdown central, right? I mean, and we lived in Florida, which was one of the epicenters of economic meltdown central. And so I had this new baby. All of a sudden, here we are, we're buying diapers and formula. And my husband had gotten laid off the year before as part of the economic meltdown. And so I had to look at my grocery bill in a way that I hadn't before. And it was so funny because I realized there were products that I was buying because I was buying
Mhm.
Dawn dish soap. I didn't need to buy freaking Dawn dish soap. I could totally get away during that time period where we needed to find cuts. I could buy Palmolive because it was already cheaper and it was always on sale and then there was always a coupon. And it was okay. It worked. But the amount of products that I bought simply because my mom used those products in our
Mhm.
household and I just continued buying them. So I think sometimes some of the structure is the same. It's like, is it there for a reason? Is it there because I love Dawn dish soap and this is the best dish soap and this is the company that I want to support? Or am I just using Dawn dish soap because my mom did? And it's the same with structure. Am I doing this because this works for us and this serves us and this makes great sense and I've really analyzed it? Or is this just how I've been kind of trained to be a cog in the American industrial machine? And so sometimes you'll probably land on one end of the spectrum, sometimes on the other side of the spectrum, sometimes in the middle. Even as an individual, when you weigh different components of structure and
Yeah.
figure out what works best and what doesn't. But it just seems like there was this really visceral reaction to our deschooling episode that was like, deschooling, but structure. No, we hit a nerve there, didn't we? Let's take a look at that. Where does nerve come from? There's some digging into.
Yeah. But that kind of rolls us into like our last question of the episode really well, of this idea: should our goal be to transform our lives to resemble polychronic culture? And I think when talking through this, it's pretty clear that both of us think there's a lot of value to polychronic culture. I will say the flip side, again, going back to have just been in Italy, and I'm sure you can think of plenty of examples of this as well with your husband from South American culture. My friend had a paper that was about like end of life decisions. And it's very hard to make those kinds of decisions yourself in Italy because it's still very much controlled by the Vatican and the Pope. But there's a new system in place and there's a nonprofit that will help you get the paperwork and help you get it signed and notarized by all of these people. And then you file it with your county commune, like your government office, and they have it on file. And it's supposed to, in theory, protect the rights that you have and that you want. And she's like, oh, so I've got my paper and I've got to go to the commune and they're open once a week for these hours and it's that day and it's that time. So how much money you want to bet they're not going to be open and it's not going to get anywhere? And I was like, oh, from just the way that you've said that, I'm certain it's not going to. And she was going into the commune office. And so we went with her to go like walk around the town and do some stuff. And we had a plan to meet back up in like an hour. And we met back up and she was like, well, the good news is I've done my first of 4 trips, and hopefully by the 4th trip, I'll actually see someone. And it was like she just knew, right? And I mean, I cannot imagine living my life that way for everything. This idea that I'm going to have to make 4 appointments to get the one thing addressed.
And in Europe, Italy is known for being one of the most bureaucratic governments as far as efficiency is concerned.
About efficiency. Exactly. And so there are definitely cons to living in a society where efficiency isn't prioritized.
We may unpack this whole thing and be like, ah, I'm converting. I shall be polychronic from now on. Go ahead, show up late for your pediatrician appointment 3, 4, 5, 6 times in a row. You won't have a pediatrician anymore. I mean, you live in America. They'll drop you. They won't keep you if you're late or you don't keep appointments or whatever. So I think there's maybe some pros to picking up some of the tendencies or some of the mindset, like some of the interpersonal things, some of the social emotional components, some of the fluidity. But then when you're interacting with people outside of your circle of trust, right, in your little comfort zone, you can't necessarily have that same level of fluidity because they won't have gone on this journey that you've gone on to convert to polychronic culture. And it's gonna cause some friction and some relationships. And so, like we started from the beginning, unpack
Yeah.
it, see where you're at, see what's serving you, see what's not serving you. But I think if your initial reaction to deschooling is we can't go 2 months without structure, that's part of the deschooling process, is to like really look at why are you freaking out about that? Because you could survive. You'll be okay.
There's absolutely nothing out there that means that you can't make 2 months work. A year, I understand, depending on a whole lot of, well, but just that thing, depending on a whole lot of other things and the state that you live in and what all of that might look like, a year might get significantly harder for any number of reasons. But even if you are in the most strict state where you have to report all of the things and you have to do the testing and you have to, even if you're in that state, 2 months off, really, you can flub through 2 months off. No one's gonna notice.
Huh?
That's easy enough to just, it's not a big deal. Really, it's okay.
Yep, it's okay. Yeah, and I think it was interesting. Have you ever heard Tom Holland talk about his journey to sobriety, where he started just doing dry January, and he said the first couple of days, the first week was really intense, and it scared him a bit. Where he was like, I maybe have a problem here if it's this intense for me to do dry January. And by the end of January, he was still struggling. And so he was like, as hard as this is, I'm going to commit to February because it's scaring me that it's this hard. And
Right.
so he did February and then eventually came to this place where he was like, I'm going to go through June. And if I can make it to June, then I know I've got this. Right. And by June, he felt so good and had, done so much soul searching and whatever that he's been sober ever since. So at the end of that 2 months, if you're still like really struggling too with this, like, like, you know,
Yeah, you're
they're
not
cold
done.
sweat over here. You're not done deschooling.
Yeah, you're already done. Yeah.
About
Yeah, that's a great
Mhm.
analogy. I hope everyone who listened today is is really willing to listen and take that step back and think about it. Some of our episodes were like, we like this, or we're going to talk about that. We're really going to, but this is one of those episodes. It's like, here's some really good food for thought. Take some time and really think about these things and how they apply across your life, because it's not direct, it's not specifically about homeschooling, but it can really change your family dynamics and just the peace in your life if you have been very intentional about the way that you've structured your
Mhm.
family life.
Oh, I love that. That's so huge.
All right. So that pretty much wraps us up. We've got a few more things. I mentioned at the start of the episode that we have this beautiful community of like minded, progressive homeschoolers. I don't have to tell you, if you're listening to us specifically, that the world is on fire right now. Like we're disappearing legal Americans. I like this Department of Education, like they don't even know what IDEA is. Like I don't know. The news gets worse and worse literally every day. Like we're getting ready to annex and invade Canada because we're gonna stop providing that. I don't Okay. The only way that we are going to survive what's coming is by creating some community and just supporting one another, right? So come and join us. You can just go to Facebook. I know not everyone is happy about Facebook right now, but as two white women, we feel really strongly about the fact that we need to stand in that space and make sure it doesn't become a conservative echo chamber. So we're going to stay there on Facebook for right now. We're on other places, but we're staying there. We have the privilege to be able to hold this space and keep this space. So go on Facebook, search Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. Once you find it, there'll be our regular open public page, and there's a group. It has the extra title on it that says Secular and Progressive AF. That's where you want to be. That'd be us. Come join us. We'd love to have you there.
100%. Yeah, I love that. So we shall end our episode with the mantra for the week, which is whether you're running a tight schedule or winging it like a true polychronic pro, just remember, kids learn best when life is the lesson. Now go forth and embrace the fluidity or the color-coded planner. No judgment. So again, we hope you took something away from today's episode. Let us know in the comments what you think. Let's continue the conversation. And in the meantime, happy homeschooling.
Yeah, have a great one.